Ahem. Greetings, Starfighter. Well, no, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but we are kind of space travelers. I mean, we're on this big rock hurtling through space around the sun, but it doesn't feel like we're space travelers, right? I mean, sitting on your couch doesn't feel like you're in space. Space is rockets and stars and the very real possibility of dying in the black vacuum of the void. That's what makes it fun. Most of us had like an astronaut phase when we were kids. I don't think I know anybody that didn't want to be an astronaut at some point between the ages of 4 and 9. I learned about the shuttle program in school. I loved the shuttle program. I had a favorite shuttle. It was Atlantis. I love Atlantis. Don't argue with me about this. Atlantis is the best shuttle. And many of us have gotten to space-themed sci-fi over the years, whether it's books and comics or shows and movies. I myself am really into Star Trek and Stargate, which now that I think about it, Stargate has an Atlantis as well, and it's not as good as the other one. Shuttle Atlantis beats Stargate Atlantis. I will fight you on this. But when I look back on the space-themed properties that really got me started on this sort of thing when I was very young, there are two that come to mind. The first one, of course, is Star Wars. I don't think you could be alive in the United States in the last 40 years and not be exposed to Star Wars. It's everywhere. Although I have to admit, as a kid, I didn't really get the hype about Star Wars. Episodes 4 through 6, which were the first 3 Star Wars movies released chronologically, were on the VHS shelf in my house when I was a kid, because my dad taped them off HBO sometime in the 80s, and I watched them. These were the ones before George Lucas went back and messed with it and added a bunch of CGI and made it so that Han didn't shoot first. So these were the OG Star Wars, and they were okay. I didn't super love the gritty space cowboy aesthetic. I didn't really get it. I don't think it was really for me. That said, I absolutely would have killed for a chipper little mouse droid, and I probably still would. The other space property that really influenced me as a kid was The Last Starfighter. This one also lived on our VHS shelf, and I watched the hell out of this one too. And it had a lot going for it, not just space, but also regular guy who lived on Earth and video games, which were a big deal in the 80s when this came out. Came out in 1984, actually. Having the main character be just a regular guy from Earth instead of a hero in a galaxy far, far away made it a lot more relatable to little tiny me. Of course, the graphics in this movie do not measure up to today's CGI, and no one would expect them to, but for the time, they were pretty groundbreaking, and they looked good for a lot longer than they should have. But despite the appeal of space, plus regular guy, plus video game, The Last Starfighter just didn't get the foothold that Star Wars did. It didn't get theme parks, it didn't get major merchandise tie-ins, it didn't get a build-your-own Death Blossom merchandise shop. None of that happened for them. The Last Starfighter did respectably well at the box office, although it did underperform from what was expected. And it got a novelization, and a video game, and an off-Broadway musical. We'll get to that in a minute. But it's also one of those movies that most people I talk to have never heard of. It came and went and sort of vanished into the ether, while the Star Treks and the Star Warses of the world just kept on chugging away. Still, this movie being among our VHS tapes meant that it had me in a chokehold at a very young age. Also, The Last Starfighter actually had a lot in common with Star Wars Episode 4, the first Star Wars movie released in 1977, and I'll get to some of those similarities in a minute. So, as part of my ongoing journey to deconstruct the movies that formed my personality as a child, I'm going to break down The Last Starfighter. I'm going to get into the plot, I'm going to get into the similarities with Star Wars, and I'm going to get into the lore, because this movie's got some. I will understand if you'd rather go watch that movie before you watch this video, and that's totally fine, you can do that, but you don't have to watch the movie to watch this video. You'll understand, I promise, because you just have to be somebody who remembers what it's like to be a kid who loves space. And then, you have to get comfortable, because you've been recruited by the Star League to defend the frontier against Azur and the Ko-Dan Armada. Let's go. Like I said, this movie came out in 1984, and it was one of the big summer movies of that year. It was written by a guy named Jonathan Betuel, and at the time, he wasn't very well known. This was kind of his big break. He said he got the inspiration for this because he was reading The Once and Future King, which is sort of the definitive story about Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. So he's reading that, and he goes into an arcade, and he sees a kid playing an arcade game. And he has a thought. He's like, what if Excalibur is actually a video game? And what if a kid could get a high score in a video game and light a plot on fire? And that's basically where this movie came from. The Last Starfighter was directed by Nick Castle, who's a prolific director and writer. He also played Michael Myers in the original Halloween movie because he was buddies with John Carpenter, and he got paid $25 a day to wear that painted William Shatner mask and look menacing. The Last Starfighter was a modest success, making $28.7 million on a budget of $15 million. And it got good reviews from critics, which is always nice. But it underperformed as far as Universal was concerned because it didn't become the next Star Wars. Why didn't it become the next Star Wars? They were very frustrated by that. They saw what George Lucas had done and they wanted a piece of that. And it just didn't happen. We'll get to all that in a sec, but first I need to explain the plot of The Last Starfighter so you can get all caught up and take this journey with me. Here's the plot of The Last Starfighter in a nutshell. The protagonist is Alex Rogan, a teenager played by 24-year-old Lance Guest, who lives in a trailer park with his mom and little brother. Alex is sort of the handyman for the entire trailer park. Everyone calls him when something breaks. And I guess he gets paid for that because he's saving up to go to college. It's implied that he's smart and has aspirations to go to a good school, but at the start of the movie, he gets a letter denying him for a loan. And his mom is like, well, you can still go to city college with your friends. Which is the consolation prize he doesn't want, because Alex honestly doesn't have friends. He has a girlfriend, Maggie, who also lives in the trailer park with her grandma, but other than that, Alex seems to hate the other teenagers who come around, and they also seem to barely tolerate him. One thing Alex actually likes is a video game called The Last Starfighter. The trailer park has a little convenience store place, and the game cabinet is right outside the shop, and he plays the hell out of this thing. The same night he finds out his school loan is denied, he beats the high score in the game, and when he's doing this, the entire trailer park comes out to watch. You can tell most of them don't know what's going on really, but they're all there cheering him on, and it's honestly a really wholesome moment when the whole community is there for this kid and his game. So he beats the high score, gets the bad news about the loan, goes off to pout, and then a cool car drives up. The driver is Centauri, and I like Centauri. He's fun. He's got that smarmy con man charm that could really be uncomfortable, but is played as sweet instead. He introduces himself as the inventor of the game, and invites Alex into the car so they can chat. Alex forgets that it's the 80s when stranger danger was a thing, and gets in the car. There's already a guy in the car that you can't see well, and Centauri introduces him as Beta. Beta shakes Alex's hand, a big spark goes off that hurts Alex, and then Beta gets out of the car. Centauri takes off, with Alex in the car. Who could have seen that coming? And now Alex is freaking out. Centauri explains that Alex is special. He's done a great thing beating the game, blah blah blah. The car becomes a spaceship, and Centauri flies them far from Earth, and there's a funny part where he takes off his human disguise and freaks out Alex. A while later, they arrive at Rylos, which is where the Star League is based. I should clarify that I don't think they're actually on Rylos. I think they're on one of the moons where this base is, but honestly, it doesn't matter. The Star League is at war with the Ko-Dan Empire, which has something called the Ko-Dan Armada, which just sounds so cool, I can't even with that. The Ko-Dan Empire is run by a guy named Zur, who is the son of the leader of the Star League, and who got banished from the Star League for being a prick. And let me tell you, Zur is amazing. He chews the scenery like nothing you've ever seen. He is all in on being an evil tyrant. So let me walk you through how all this works. Rylos and the other planets of the Star League are protected by a frontier. It's like a big energy barrier in space. But the Ko-Dan Armada has been working on cutting through it for a long time, and they're finally starting to break through. Zur is on the Ko-Dan flagship with a commander named Lord Krill, who clearly barely tolerates Zur and his big dumb ego because he'll help the Armada beat the Star League. So Rylos is scrambling at starfighters, who basically make up the sum total of their Star League's military might. I mean, they have stationary cannons and fortifications and stuff, but as far as ships and pilots go, it's pretty much just starfighters. Starfighters are from all the Star League worlds, and they all pass something called the Excalibur test. You pass the test, you're a starfighter. Starfighters and their navigators fly in big ships called Gunstars, all of which are stationed at Starfighter Command, which is this base on Rylos. Now, where does Earth fall into all this? It doesn't, technically. Earth isn't part of the Star League. It has no idea what's going on with the Ko-Dan. So when Centauri rolls up with Alex, there's a lot of, why did you bring a human here? It turns out Centauri gets paid for every starfighter he recruits, so he decided to get clever and turn the Excalibur test into a video game and leave it on Earth. I don't know whether he seriously thought a human would be able to beat it, and I don't know whether he knew that the game was left in the middle of nowhere trailer park with like one kid ever playing it, but still, he got lucky. Alex had so little else to occupy himself that he got good at the game and passed the test. So, Centauri brings him to Rylos and demands to be paid, and there's some back and forth about whether that's okay, and Alex stands there confused and dumb-faced the whole time. Oh, but there's this great moment where they put a universal translator on Alex's collar, because of course he doesn't speak Rylan, and he's been in the dark the whole time about what's being said around him. And the second the translator's in place, all of the background chatter, all the conversations, everything switches from Rylan to English. So now Alex and the viewer can understand what's going on. I just remember thinking that was hella cool when I was a kid.
Join the other recruits.
Anyway, Alex is through the induction for new starfighters and gets to know a navigator named Grig. And you know what? I love Grig. I would die for Grig. He's the cutest.
I love Grig.
he's Grig.
My apologies, Starfighter. Star Navigator First Class Grig, at your service, sir.
Anyway, they sit through the presentation, only Zur hacks the broadcast so he shows up on screen and screams about being the ruler and executes a captured spy for everyone to see. This was pretty traumatizing when I was a kid, not gonna lie. The screams are blood-curdling. Alex is like, peace out, I'm done, that guy just died, this isn't my fight. Centauri, of course, is pissed, tries to change Alex's mind by saying, you're so gifted, you're the best ever to play the game. But Alex is like, nope. Centauri grudgingly takes him back to Earth and gives him a little communicator thing he can tap if he changes his mind. Now, while Centauri is flying Alex home, one of the Rylans who's loyal to Zur sets a bomb and blows up Starfighter Command's computers, which disables the base's defensive cannons. The Ko-Dan Armada has a big enough hole in the frontier now that they can aim a meteor gun at the base from a distance and bombard it, so they do that, destroying almost everything and killing all the other starfighters. Also, the guy who blew up the computers sends a message to Zur to let him know one starfighter got away, because of course Alex wasn't there. And he counts as a starfighter now, because he sat through the onboarding process. Zur sends an assassin to deal with Alex, and the assassin is called a Zandozan. It can change its appearance to be just about anyone, and it has a blaster gun. It's also super gross in its normal form. Anyway, back on Earth, there's a problem. Beta is here. Remember Beta? We met him in Centauri's car. He's like the first Beta male. Beta's there to be a robot replica of Alex, covering Alex's workload while he's gone so no one will be suspicious. Except, he's terrible at being Alex. He fails at fixing stuff and being a good boyfriend and all that, so he's definitely raised some suspicions. Alex is pissed and uses the communicator to recall Centauri to take the stupid robot away, but just as Centauri rolls up, the Zandozan attacks. Centauri jumps out and shoots it, but he gets hit in the process. Alex is like, what the hell was that? And Centauri and Beta are like, dude, they know who you are. They're gonna send more of those guys. You and your family and probably your whole planet are screwed unless you go be a starfighter and kill the assholes. Alex says, Beta, you go do it. You look like me. Beta says, Beta units can't fight. We're not allowed, which is a whole can of worms that they never really get into, but we'll just leave it there. Beta says he'll stay on Earth and keep being Alex, super helpful, and Alex goes back with Centauri, who's bleeding from being shot by the Zandozan. They get back to Rylos, but the base is mostly destroyed. As they roll into the hangar area, Centauri loses control, the car kinda crashes, but Alex isn't hurt. It's just a bummer because Centauri's dying. Grig is there, because luckily he wasn't in the main hangar when the attack happened. And he talks to Centauri, who's all like, see, I brought him back. And it's honestly really sad. I remember being broken up about this as a kid, and it makes me tear up when I think about it now. Grig closes Centauri's eyes and then takes Alex out of there. Turns out there's one Gunstar left. It's an experimental prototype Grig was working on, so it was in another area when the attack went down. So now, Alex and Grig have something to fly. They take the ship out so Alex can learn how to fly for real. Back on Earth, Beta's still trying to be Alex and sucking at it. He and Maggie go with their friends to camp at a lake, and he finally confesses to her that he's not Alex. He tells her the whole story. She, of course, doesn't believe him, but right then, another Zandozan shoots him in the gut and exposes the inner wires and circuits. Beta realizes the Zandozan heard him say, I'm not Alex, so he steals his friend's truck, and he and Maggie chase the Zandozan. The assassin's heading for some sort of comms relay thing that will send a message to Zur. He starts to send the message, and Beta's like, you need to tuck and roll, Maggie. So she jumps out of the truck, and Beta rams the comms thing, blowing it up and killing himself and the Zandozan before he could finish the message. Zur gets the message, which is just, the Last Starfighter, roll credits, and he assumes the end would have been, is dead. So he's like, cool, the Last Starfighter's dead, let's go take over the Star League. Lord Krill is a bit dubious, but what you gonna do? You let a sociopath run your armada. This is the bed you made, Ko-Dan. Alex and Grig have no idea how they're gonna take on the mothership and all the little fighters. They know they need to knock out the comms turret so the fighters can't communicate, but they have to go through the fighters to get to the comms turret. So they decide to hide in a moon until the Armada goes by and then knock out the turret from behind. This works, and the fighters are all over the place. Alex gets some more shots in on the mothership, and that ends up being the last straw for Lord Krill. So he orders Zur into custody, which is very satisfying. But then all the explosions and rocking around help him get loose from his captors, and he gets into an escape pod, so Zur takes off and is out of the movie. Alex and Grig are getting overwhelmed by fighters because they're just one ship and there's like 1 billion fighters, so they activate the Gunstar's experimental weapon, the Death Blossom. It's a weapon of last resort because it basically turns the ship into a spinning, shooting ball of death. They spin, they fire, every fighter's taken out, and then they just sit there adrift in space. The Death Blossom basically sucks all the power, so Grig has to reroute some systems to get the power back on. He does that, which is good because the mothership is about to ram them and they narrowly miss getting wiped out. Alex shoots the mothership some more and takes out their nav systems, so they end up crashing onto a moon. There's this really metal scene where the Ko-Dan guys are all freaking out, their systems are all fried, there's explosions all over the bridge, and this assistant guy goes, "What do we do?" And Lord Krill just looks at him and says,
We die.
like, "Damn, Krill." And they do. The end. Actually, not quite. Cut to Rylos, where everyone's super excited that Alex saved the day. Also, Centauri's still alive! Woo! He was dormant while his body repaired itself, which makes no sense after Grig closed his eyes and wished him luck in the next dimension, but whatever, it's almost over. The Rylan leader is all like, "Zur's still out there, we still need you, you're gonna stay, right?" So Alex decides to be a starfighter, but first he has to go home and talk to his family. What follows is the most wish fulfillment scene any kid could hope for. Alex lands the Gunstar right by the trailer park. Everyone comes running and freaking out, and he gets to explain that he's actually a starfighter and he's got to keep the planet safe. Grig is like, he's a hero, which makes the other teenagers jealous, as it should. Alex asks Maggie to go, and she resists because she's worried about her grandmother. But at the last second, she jumps on the ship with him, and that's the end. Oh, and the game is still there, so I guess people can still pass the Excalibur test on Earth if they really want to. And you better believe I kept an eye out for that Last Starfighter game cabinet anytime I was anywhere that had video games. So that's the plot of The Last Starfighter. On the surface, it's kind of goofy sci-fi fun, definitely family friendly except for maybe that torture scene, and broadly appealing. Is there even anything left to talk about? Yes. Yes, there is. I said before that The Last Starfighter has a lot in common with Star Wars, and I mean that in more ways than you think I do. But we'll get to that. First, let's talk about the parallels in theme and plot. First, our protag. Alex Rogan and Luke Skywalker are both teenagers who don't have fathers, who live in a desert, and really wish they were somewhere better. But when things kick off, they really don't want to get involved at first. They don't think it's their fight. For Luke, it takes torching his whole family for him to get involved, and for Alex, it takes the threat of torching his whole family to get involved. Both of them have a mentor figure who drags them into the fight and then dies along the way, but also comes back later. For Luke, Obi-Wan comes back as a ghost, and for Alex, Centauri just comes back. He's alive. He never really died, I guess. I don't even know how that works. Don't worry, he's alive, that's all that matters. They're both fighting an evil empire, although in Last Starfighter, the Ko-Dan I don't think are in charge of anything yet. They're trying to be, but it's not like in Star Wars where the Empire is already in charge. Still, big empire, lots of big ships. Both Luke and Alex managed to beat the Empire with a scrappy, ragtag crew of ingenuity and gumption because might doesn't always make right. And in both cases, the main antagonist of the movie gets hurtled out somewhere near the end and not seen again, but still around in case he needs to come back. So Zur takes an escape pod and we don't see him anymore. And for Darth Vader, his TIE fighter gets hit with something and he gets sent off to, I don't know, Dagobah maybe? Either way, they're both still alive and the potential for sequels is maintained. Theme-wise, there are a few that cross over here. The theme of found family is pretty big in both movies. Alex has his mom and his brother. We don't know whatever happened to his dad. But he's also got the community of the trailer park, who is remarkably supportive of him, even though he's not actually that nice of a guy. And then later, Grig becomes part of his found family, and all of Rylos takes him in as well. So, along the way, Alex keeps growing his family of people that believe in him and support him, even if he doesn't always live up to their expectations. Star Wars is similar in that Luke starts out with a family, but they are quickly taken out of the picture so he can go with Obi-Wan and his newfound family to form a rebellion against the Empire and fight. Luke gets really attached to Obi-Wan really quickly and has that scream crying thing when he gets killed. That doesn't happen so much with Alex and Centauri. I mean, he's attached, but I just met you, man. I'm not gonna cry that much when you're dead. I'm just gonna be like, oh, that's a bummer. But yeah, either way, still an attachment, just not as severe. Another theme is what I'm gonna call the insidiousness of neutrality. In both cases, our reluctant heroes are galvanized into action because in a conflict like this, you can't really sit on the fence. Silence is quite literally violence. You have to pick a side and take action, otherwise you're complicit in anything that happens. Both protags do eventually sign on to do what's right. That ties into a greater theme of fighting evil for the good, but I don't even really consider that a theme because it's so pervasive in just about every story ever, but still, I'll mention it because it's there. Pushing back against oppressive empires and fighting regimes is just kind of part and parcel for these scrappy star stories, so still, we're saving the galaxy. Then, of course, there's the theme of hope. Both these movies have hope in situations where there really shouldn't be any hope. There's just some dire straits. For Alex, the entire Starfighter command has been destroyed. He is quite literally the only one left.
Last Starfighter.
He's the last. For Luke, the Empire has the Death Star, and it's almost impenetrable. These are some impossible odds in both movies. That's nothing new. A lot of movies use that trope in some form or another, but in this case, hope actually does prevail. Both heroes use their out-of-the-box thinking and clever wits to find ways around the problem and make something unwinnable into something winnable. That's not to say they don't have doubts off and on, but they stick with it and don't walk away. Well, okay, Alex does try to walk away a lot, but he comes back in the end, so it works out. So, parallels in story and theme aside, there's a lot more that links these two movies together. First, the score. Both of these movies have epic, sweeping scores. Again, that's not super unusual, but both of these movies have scores that really stay with you. It's like, I bet if I told you to hum the Indiana Jones theme right now, you could probably do it. Or Superman. Or Star Wars. And if you heard the Last Starfighter theme, you could probably hum that one for a while too. And it's powerful and interesting enough to be picked up and played by symphonies around the world. The Star Wars score was, of course, composed by John Williams, who drew a lot of inspiration from Holst's The Planets. Which sort of makes sense. Space, planets, it works. If you've never listened to Holst, I recommend you check out The Planets, specifically the Venus and Mars parts, and yeah, you'll see the influence. You'll see where Star Wars got a lot of its sound from. I did find some sources that suggested that George Lucas was listening to The Planets while he was making Star Wars, and so when it came time to score it, he actually sent The Planets to John Williams and said, this is what I was listening to for inspiration. So I guess it kind of makes sense that it would have worked out the way it did. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It's fine. The Last Starfighter was composed by Craig Safan, a pretty prolific TV and film composer. He's been in Hollywood for a few decades. He actually did the music for the TV show Cheers, and he won some awards for that one. So behold, The Last Starfighter on vinyl! I wasn't gonna get this. It's a lot more expensive than the pirate movie soundtrack, but Lupus got it for me as an early Christmas present, and I am so hyped. This thing is so great. I love it so much. It's mine now. Where was I? So it's interesting to note that there were two songs written for that soundtrack that never saw the light of day. They weren't on the albums, they've disappeared. One of them is called Satisfy the Night, and the other one is called Red Eyes. The soundtrack's been re-released a few times since the original in 1984. In 1995, they released one with all the tracks in chronological order, because weirdly, this one doesn't have the tracks in chronological order, they're just sort of all there. In 2015, a complete remaster was released that also had the songs all in chronological order and had the full final credit scene song in there as well. But Satisfy the Night and Red Eyes still aren't on it. It's a shame. Like I said, orchestras really like this score, and arrangements of it have been played by the Prague Symphony Orchestra, the Cincinnati Pops Orchestra, the London Symphony Orchestra. I have the Prague one on my Spotify playlist actually, and it's really good. It's really inspirational when I need a little extra push. Also, here's a video of Craig Safan himself conducting the Last Starfighter suite at the International Film Music Festival in Spain in 2014. So this would have been the 30-year anniversary of the movie. Another strong link between the two movies is the special effects and design. Artist Ron Cobb worked on both movies. He did creature design for the first Star Wars movie, and he did the designs for creatures, ships, all the cool stuff in The Last Starfighter. He's done design work in a lot of great movies. In fact, I'm sure you've seen his stuff a lot more often than you think. There's a deviation here with the special effects though, specifically computer-generated special effects, and I really need to get into it because it is super cool. So, strap in. I'm not going to go super in-depth into the production of this movie, but this part is really key. The Last Starfighter was not the first movie to use CGI, but it was the first movie to use photorealistic CGI of things that exist in our real world. Let me explain. Look at movies like Tron, where all the computer-generated content takes place in a computer-generated world that isn't meant to look like reality. By comparison, The Last Starfighter uses CG to create all the ships and bases, and then puts those ships and bases into actual space and on actual planets, like the scene where Alex's Gunstar lands on Earth behind the trailer park. Pretty much the only effects in this movie that weren't CG were makeup effects and explosions. This was groundbreaking for the time. Up to this point, if your movie or show had a spaceship in it, they built a little model of that spaceship and they used those as a practical effect to get all the shots of the ship. For Last Starfighter, all those practical effects were swapped for CGI ships, all made by a company called Digital Productions. This was done to save money, so we could say that The Last Starfighter was the first domino to fall in the line that led us to here, where everything is CGI and all the best actors in the world are having to act against green tennis balls on a stick. No, I don't like that. Let's say Last Starfighter was the first domino to fall that led us to the amazing combination of practical and CGI effects in movies like Jurassic Park. Yeah, I like that better. For better or worse, it did actually save money. Estimates say that using CG cut the time it took to do these scenes in half, and it cost only about a third of what it would have cost if they used practical effects. Of course, all those cool CGI scenes needed some real computing power to run them. There were about 300 scenes in the movie that had CGI in them. All those scenes were rendered on a Cray XMP supercomputer. At the time, it was one of the most powerful computers available. Each CGI frame was high-res and contained more than 250,000 polygons. The Gunstar, which of course was a huge key piece of the visual storytelling, was 750,000 polygons. And even with a supercomputer, this movie pushed the absolute limits. The scene with the Death Blossom going off apparently crashed the Cray machine several times. The visual effects coordinator said that doing all the renders they wanted to do would take about 17 months. And he was told he had 6 months. So they had to make some choices. Some things didn't turn out the way they really wanted them to because they just didn't have the time, even if the technology existed. For example, they're not super happy with how the moon turned out in the scene where Alex and Greg hide in a moon and wait for the Armada to pass. It looks kind of melty and unfinished, but that's a time issue and not because the technology didn't exist. And honestly, they put the time they needed into the things that they needed most, which was the ships. The ships were the most important thing by far. I'll take a melty planet if it means the ships look like they do. The end result of the ships looks pretty nice. As a kid, I took it at face value pretty easily that there's a spaceship in the real world. One other note that YouTubers The Corridor Crew pointed out, this movie was also the first time that filmmakers used a green screen background for a scene that was later filled in with CGI. Just one more groundbreaking first. Also, if you have a moment, go check out the Corridor Crew's conversation about how this movie was made. The link is in the description. It's really fun to see like modern animators and effects specialists looking at the ancient texts. Here's another little tie back to Star Wars, because we can't get away from the connections between these two movies. Digital Productions, which of course did the effects for this movie, also did something else back in 1978. 1978 was 1 year after Star Wars A New Hope came out, and Digital Productions made some test footage for Industrial Light and Magic, ILM, showing X-Wing fighters rendered in 3D doing maneuvers that motion control just couldn't create. But George Lucas wasn't there for the slick computer-generated coverage. He thought the ships looked too clean, too shiny, too unbroken. The ships in his universe were dirty and constantly needing repairs, and this just wasn't it. So Digital Productions went back and tried to figure out how to add that gritty element to the renders, and ILM basically said, "Good job, guys, it looks really cool and promising, get back to us in a few years and we'll see where it is." Which, now we all know how CGI heavy the Star Wars properties are, with Lucas even going back and adding CGI to his earliest movies, so I guess we got there in the end. Anyway, it's still pretty cool to see those X-Wing renders, and it's kind of cool to think about what could have happened if George Lucas had actually liked them. Things could have gone a totally different way. And honestly, The Last Starfighter probably wouldn't have gotten made because Digital Productions would have been up to their asses in Ewoks, so I'm kind of happy things worked out the way they did. Before I move on to the next section, I want to highlight a few other fun little facts about the production of The Last Starfighter. Nothing too in-depth, just things that caught my eye that made me go, oh, I think you guys would like that. I got most of these from a 10-year-old article on Gizmodo. The link is in the description. So one of the first challenges the filmmakers had was to make this not like other 80s movies. Many 80s movies are set in the suburbs. Think like E.T. or Poltergeist. So even though they initially planned to put Last Starfighter in the burbs, they swapped it for the trailer park instead. which I think was a solid move for a lot of reasons. The whole community aspect of the old folks in their trailers coming out to support Alex made this movie a lot more wholesome than it might otherwise have been. For the cast, the two mains, Lance Guest and Catherine Mary Stewart, as Alex and Maggie, were not very well known at this time, but they had great chemistry, which helped a lot with the believability of the movie, especially the ending. The guy who plays Centauri is Robert Preston, who's probably best known for being the lead in the Music Man movie in 1962. And director Nick Castle thought putting this guy in as Centauri was one of the great castings of the 80s. The scriptwriter even rewrote some of Centauri's character to be more like the Music Man character once they decided on him for the role. This was Preston's last feature film. He passed away in 1987. We've talked about the CG effects already, but not everything was CG, of course. The Star Car physical prop was apparently more or less a VW motor with some sheet metals tacked up against it. It wasn't a good thing, but when I was a kid, for some reason I thought it was like a DeLorean. Like I had it in my head that this was a really cool car, so whatever they did, it worked on my tiny child brain. They did all the live-action shooting over just 38 days in California, and it mostly went well. One thing they didn't expect was how well the Beta unit was going to be received by test audiences. They loved that guy. They ended up having to bring Lance Guest back to shoot more Beta unit scenes after principal shooting had wrapped, only by then he'd already cut his hair short because he'd wrapped and thought he was done, and he was super sick as well, so they had to use a crappy wig and a ton of makeup to make him look not deathly ill, and also at all like the character they'd already shot. As a kid, I didn't notice the makeup and the bad wig and the Beta unit for most of those scenes. Maybe I'm just not that observant. Yeah, no, I'm really not that observant. Also, in a weird almost crossover with Star Trek instead of Star Wars, Will Wheaton is in The Last Starfighter. He's the actor who played Wesley Crusher in Star Trek The Next Generation. All of his lines were cut, but he's still there in the background of some of the trailer park scenes. So that's just some of the fun stuff that was going on when this movie was made. Of course, there's a very key element to this movie that I haven't talked about yet. The game. Arcade games were all the rage in the 80s, so what's the deal with this game? Was there a game? Sort of. So it turns out there was a Last Starfighter game, more than one of them actually, but it's a little bit complicated. To start with, Nintendo released a Last Starfighter game for NES in 1990. It was a side-scroller with the player flying a Gunstar and fighting the Ko-Dan Armada. The Death Blossom was activated at the end of levels to blow up the battleship. The problem with this game is that it wasn't actually about the Last Starfighter. It was originally a game called Uridium, which was on the Commodore 64. And it was just lightly reskinned to make it more Last Starfighter-ish. It doesn't seem to have any real resemblance to the movie, so I don't really count that. Atari also made a game called The Last Starfighter for the Atari 2600 in 1984, the year the movie came out, but of course the Atari 2600 could not produce the sort of graphics that you see on the game in the movie. And because of that, they didn't release it under the name The Last Starfighter. They released it under the name Solaris instead. Solaris appears to be the name of at least one of the devs who worked on it, and their name appears during the opening credits of the prototype. So this one also doesn't really count as the Last Starfighter game. Then there's Rogue Synapse. Rogue Synapse is a company that claims it wants to make the games and game cabinets that appear in movies, but don't actually exist in real life. They say they want to recreate gameplay and make it as real as possible. Because remember, the gameplay in the movie is not real gameplay. It's just images generated to make it look like gameplay for the purposes of the movie. The game itself doesn't exist, which is where Rogue Synapse comes in. From the Rogue Synapse website, it looks like they're working on a Last Starfighter game cabinet, but it also looks like their website hasn't been updated in a while. On one spot, they suggest you rush out and buy an HD DVD player so you can watch the HD DVD release of The Last Starfighter. HD DVDs were discontinued in 2008, so that tells you the last time this website was updated. Anyway, Rogue Synapse did develop a playable version of the game from the movie, and you can download it from their website and play it yourself, which is what I did. Obviously, it doesn't have the same controls as an arcade cabinet does, but I still had to give it a try. I mean, come on, it's The Last Starfighter. I had to try this game. The gameplay is not very intuitive. It's not made for keyboards, so there are directional controls on the J, K, I, and L keys, and also on the W, A, S, and D. There's firing mechanics on the mouse and on the left Alt key, and there are other toggles that I wasn't really sure about. And I did read the README file that came with it, so it's not like I skipped the instructions. The game is meant to be hard, but I found it especially hard. The field of vision for firing is limited, the movement is a little jank, and the power runs out on your weapons pretty fast. Still, it looks exactly like the game in the movie, and it was fun, a lot of fun. The first time I hit something with my lasers, I felt like a starfighter. But I got my ass handed to me by scout ships every time I played it, so I'm pretty sure Centauri's not going to be rolling up in the star car anytime soon. Okay.
Greetings,
This is it.
Starfighter.
Here we go.
You have been recruited by the Star League to defend the frontier against Zur and the Ko-Dan Armada. Get ready? Prepare for blast off.
You've been recruited by the Star League to defend the frontier against Zur and the Ko-Dan Armada. Okay. We're in.
Prepare for target light practice, Starfighter.
Okay, target light practice is really hard. Oh, come on. I'm not the navigator. Grig is the navigator. I can't turn the ship. I feel like I'm getting really close. Got it! I got a target light. Oh! That's particle beams. Or photon bolts or something. This is particle beams. Where are they? Where are they? Where are you? Ah! Oh, come on. Oh! Yeah! Okay, I'm getting better.
May the luck of the seven pillars of Ghoul be with you at all times.
Back at you, Centauri. Hey, got him! Many targets escaped. That's fine. Okay, let's go get him. Shit. Before they get us. No!
25 cents more, please.
Anyway, if you like this movie and or retro video games in general, and you like to play things that are kind of janky and have unforgiving difficulty, go check out this game. Be sure to install the fonts that come with it if you want the most authentic experience. Okay, so like with many things, rumors of a sequel to The Last Starfighter have been swirling for literally decades. So let me catch you up on what we actually know about this. Sometime in 2014, which was the 30-year anniversary of the initial release of The Last Starfighter, apparently Seth Rogen was looking for the remake rights to this movie. He also claimed that Steven Spielberg wanted the remake rights to it too. But the guy who has the rights is Jonathan Betuel, the writer, and he was not giving that up. In July 2015, he apparently made a deal to make something called the Starfighter Chronicles. This was supposed to be a virtual reality enhanced TV series produced by Surreal.tv. This was an entertainment startup at the time. But it didn't sound like the show was going to be at all related to the movie. It sounded like it was about space law enforcement. And also it never went into production, so I guess we're just not getting that. In 2020, Betuel started talking about an actual sequel to The Last Starfighter. Let's just pretend that whole Starfighter Chronicles thing never happened. And they said the sequel would be a bit of a reboot, which that happens sometimes. I'm cool with that. Betuel was working with a guy named Gary Whitta on the project. Gary is a screenwriter, game designer, and video game journalist, all of which sounds great to have for somebody working on a Last Starfighter project. In 2021, the team dropped a trailer online for something called The Last Starfighters, plural. It was mostly concept art and a remix of the original score, but it did have Alex and his gun star, and also lots of other gun stars, so that was promising that something was coming. Then things got quiet again. Just a couple of months ago, though, on September 17th, 2025, the sequel chatter online picked up again. This time because of a comic. Mad Cave Comics announced that they're going to be releasing a comic which is a sequel to the Last Starfighter movie in June of 2026. And Jonathan Betuel and the film's original producer are the creative leads on the comic. So it's allegedly a legit sequel brought to us by the people who made the original movie. If you're watching this in June of 2026 and you feel like going to get the comic, go get it. Tell me in the comments how it is. Although I'll probably have my own copy, so you know what? Don't spoil it for me, I'll find it myself. But the fact that this comic is getting made is a reason for cautious optimism. If they're making a comic, that means they're telling a story. And if they've got the story, that means they could adapt it to film. Eventually. I'm honestly glad that nobody before this has gotten the remake rights to this movie. Not every movie needs to be remade, and I just feel like this one would not have been remade well. A sequel reboot thing sounds potentially better, although it still remains to be seen whether it actually comes to fruition. Also, side note, when he was interviewed about this project, Jonathan Betchwell said this: "I'm thrilled to be collaborating with a stellar team at Mad Cave to elevate Starfighter into the multiverse." Multiverse? Please no. I've had enough multiversing with DC and Marvel. Just give us the single universe we have and put Starfighters in it. That's all we need. Please, Jonathan. But then he said, "We're all eager to chronicle the Herculean undertaking of Alex Rogan as he finds himself charged with rebuilding the legendary Starfighter Legion." So that's more like it. That makes me happy. Don't spook me with that multiverse stuff, Jonathan. This is as good a place as any to mention how The Last Starfighter has been kept alive over the years. There was a novelization written by Alan Dean Foster and published in 1984, the year the movie came out, and it's basically just a novel version of the movie. But then there's the musical. We need to take a quick look at this because, oh my god. So The Last Starfighter musical came out in the early 2000s, with the official cast recording coming out in 2007.
Listen, Rylos is calling with fortune and fame. Rylos, the world's in your video game. Yep, that's the deal. The whole thing is real. Well, that's the appeal. It's out of this world.
Other than being performed off-Broadway in New York, it has been picked up by other theater companies across the country a few times. But it's not a parody or some comedy thing, it's genuinely in earnest. I saw a few reviews that were pretty good. Here's Alan Menken, super famous Oscar-winning film and theater composer, saying he liked the musical. Well, the score anyway. Not every review was marvelous, of course. Some of them were just okay-ish. This one's pretty bad. It looks like it was performed in Cleveland as recently as 2022, so it's still floating around out there. The review I read for this performance, the one in Cleveland, said there are 19 songs, which is 16 too many for this cast that can't carry a tune. But I feel like that's not really an indictment on the musical, that's an indictment on Cleveland. Like, get your shit together, Cleveland. Get some people who can sing before you put on a show like this. So yeah, the musical exists, it's a thing, it's in the world now, and if it comes to your town and you can go see it, please, for the love of God, go see it. I don't have any hope that it's going to come here to Western Australia anytime soon or that someone's going to be inspired to put it on. But if it comes to your town, please see it and tell me how it is, unless the tickets are prohibitively expensive or something, in which case don't bother, but then I'll find the reviews online and read about how terrible your town sings too. So this movie was special in a few ways, from the music to the CGI to the theming that tapped into the cultural love of all things space after Star Wars had been such a success. But none of that is really what you should take away from The Last Starfighter. This video is about the movie that meant something to me, how it influenced me as a kid. And while it was sometimes heavy-handed, it really did drive home some important points for a young kid growing up in the Midwest who didn't really know what the world was like. Alex Rogan is a poor kid in a desert town. He doesn't have a lot going for him. He can't do what he wants to do with his life. And it's hard for him to accept that he's worth more than what he's probably been told he's worth by people who aren't his immediate family. He's a nobody. I think most of us, if we were thrown into a situation where someone told us we were actually super special and important, would protest with something like, "No, really, I'm not. I'm just me. I'm not special. I'm just a regular person." As if being a regular person is somehow less than. Most of us knee-jerk to this mild self-deprecation because it feels like the right thing, and because we don't always have the highest opinion of ourselves. Like, I think I'm pretty cool and I have a lot of good qualities, but if you told me I was an exceptionally special and important person, I would arm wrestle that a bit by default. There are people a lot cooler than me out there. For Alex, that nobody feeling is very firmly ingrained. When Centauri tells Alex how important he is, Alex responds with, "I'm just a kid from a trailer park." He dismisses the very idea that he could be important. But Centauri doesn't hesitate. He holds up a finger and says, "If that's what you think, then that's all you'll ever be."
Listen, Centauri, I'm not any of those guys. I'm a kid from a trailer park.
If that's what you think, then that's all you'll ever be.
And he's 1,000% right. If Alex had kept defining himself by his lot in life, by his poverty and his isolation, he probably wouldn't have gotten anywhere ever. Now, I want to be clear here. I'm not saying the power of positive thinking is some sort of magic bullet for getting out of poverty. Most people more or less stay where they start, especially socioeconomically, and there are very clear factors that influence this. Studies show that living in poverty as a kid dramatically increases your chances of living in poverty as an adult. And the longer you live in poverty, the harder it becomes to escape it. Ann Huff Stevens of UC Davis published findings that said you have a 56% chance of getting out of poverty if you've been poor for a year. But that drops to a 13% chance if you've been poor for 7 or more years. The regional unemployment rate for where you live also impacts your chances of getting to the middle class. A 3% increase in regional unemployment reduces the exit rate from poverty by around 6% per year, while also raising the reentry rate into poverty by 9%. Poverty is hard to get out of once you're in it. And while some people turn into success stories, those stories are interesting specifically because they're rare. Alex, of course, is trying his best. He tried to get a loan to go to a better college than the local one. He's trying to think bigger. But he's also pretty clearly beaten down. He's tired. He doesn't want this life. He complains about it and talks about wanting more. So you'd think that when the opportunity presented itself in the form of an alien recruiter in a cool car, he'd jump at it. He'd be like, hell yeah, I'm getting out of this nightmare. But he doesn't. His sense of self-worth has taken a beating from years of being poor and feeling pointless. He genuinely struggles to see himself as having value. And that's very real. He's not afraid of being a space hero or going to other planets. He's afraid that he's just a kid from a trailer park, and that that's not enough. That he isn't enough. And Centauri slaps that down immediately, which is good. That's not to say every poor kid is going to find their way out of poverty. Most of them won't. That's the reality. You can't use the power of positive thinking to put food on the table. And of course, none of them will end up being starfighters. But the first step of improving your lot in life is believing that you can, and that you're worth it. You have to have some faith in yourself before you can make change. You still might fail, but if you don't believe you have value, if you don't think you're more than where you started from, then you'll definitely fail. That sort of trust in yourself is hard, though. If you let yourself have hope, it'll hurt more if things go sideways. And as the statistics show, the odds that things will go sideways are very high for kids who start off poor. It can be easier to just give up, and Alex is pretty close to that at the start of this movie. It can be almost comforting to say, why bother? This is what I know. This is what I've always known. It sucks, but there's nothing I can do about it, so why try? Trying is hard. It's exhausting. What's the point? If I climb at all, it'll hurt more when I fall. But like Centauri says, if that's what you think, then that's all you'll ever be. You have to know yourself and know what you're capable of, even if no one else can see it. You have to believe in your own skills and talents and goals, even when banks are turning you down for loans and the other kids are mocking you for being poor. It's the hardest thing in the world, but the alternative is that that's all you'll ever be. And if you don't at least put up a fight, that's on you. If you don't think you have value, why should anyone else? The Last Starfighter isn't a chosen one narrative. Alex isn't destined to be a starfighter. It's not written in a prophecy somewhere. He's a regular kid from a trailer park in a desert. But he works hard and he keeps trying and he shows that he's actually pretty damn good at something. And that something happens to be useful to saving the galaxy. He's tempted to give up on himself. In fact, he does give up a few times, but when shit hits the fan, he steps up and finds the confidence he needs. He doesn't let anyone down. And it seems to start for him when Centauri says that line, if that's what you think, then that's all you'll ever be. Alex wants to be more, and he gets there in the end. It's a pretty satisfying character arc, and it's also something that stuck with me my entire life. Sure, the movie had groundbreaking CGI and amazing music and the wish fulfillment of being a cool guy in a spaceship who saves the world, but that single line has stayed with me since I was a little kid. I found myself thinking about it at times when I feel really down on myself, or like I can't accomplish anything. It pops into my head when I have a pity party and things don't go my way. It's a simple thing, not particularly profound, but in the context of a movie about saving the universe, it hits different. It's important. It stays with you. There were other takeaways for me with this movie, of course. The part where Beta sacrifices himself hit me pretty hard. That seemed to really make the stakes clear. This was an important thing, and people were willing to die for it on purpose. The dynamic with the little brother was familiar, since I had annoying little brothers of my own. The love of this little trailer park community moved me. I didn't know what it was like to have that sort of large extended family of neighbors and friends who all just sort of stepped up for you, even if they didn't get it. Alex was poor, but he was rich in community, and that intrigued me as a little kid. And of course the power of love, with Maggie choosing to go with Alex in the end. Of course, as a kid, I was screaming at the TV for her to get on the damn ship, but as an adult, I get why she was torn about leaving her grandmother alone, even if Granny was good with a shotgun. Again, that community was there. Although now as I think about it, I wonder if Maggie ever saw her grandmother again, or if that was the last goodbye they had. I'm gonna stop thinking about that. So that's The Last Starfighter. It's stuck around, not as much as Star Wars, but it's still lingering on the edge of cultural consciousness, and I'm glad it hasn't completely vanished from this world. This one I definitely recommend you watch. It's worth it. It's cheesy and a little goofy and probably the most 80s movie to ever 80s, but it's so worth it. Let me know what you think if you watch it, and watch out for Xanda Zans. The Last Starfighter was composed... What the fuck is that? What is that? I didn't know it had music. That's so cool. Oh my god, that's amazing.